Hello everyone, and welcome to this last session of today. It's been a hard and intense and tiring day, very exhausting, but we're going with a bang with a session with 3 magnificent artists. The focus of this session will be on the archive, or rather, or should I say, the anarchive. What we mean with that will be clear in a minute. The next three speakers are real hoarders, you could say, afflicted with what Jacques Derrida called archive fever. They collect stories, they amass material, and they develop intricate archival installations and designs. Archival installations and designs which critically question and manipulate the power mechanism underlying every single archive. Our first speaker of today, of this session, of course, is such an expert in both digital and physical archival strategies and infrastructures. Lieven van Speybroeck, sitting next to me, is a graphic designer and media artist. He graduated as a master in typography at St. Lucas, Ghent, and obtained a master in media design at the Piet Zwart Institute in Rotterdam. He has been active in book design, has been an exhibition designer for several years, and is currently working on a PhD project in the arts on contemporary archival design at Hasselt University and PXL School of Arts. Since 2017, he has been co-editor-in-chief of the online journal Collateral, a medium for artistic research. Lieven, I'm really curious.
All right, thank you, Arne, for this generous introduction. First of all, I didn't really prepare a presentation with an overview of my work. I always like to take these occasions of public lectures and public events as an occasion to somehow put some lines of thought into practice and turn the lecture itself or the presentation itself into, you could say, a work or a piece or something to somehow make it part of my research in a practical way. So, and for today, I've actually prepared, written, or could say constructed, a text that taps into the theme of this session. And I'll just perform it. I'll just do the piece, and maybe we can have a talk afterwards where I go deeper into why and what this entails. But I'll just get on with it. Something went wrong. Permission denied. Unauthorized. Forbidden. You don't have permission to perform this action. You're using an old version. Your computer is not supported. You cannot establish a secure connection. Connection refused by host. File is locked. Request timeout. Trying to connect. Trying to reconnect. Cannot connect. Host is down. You sent too many invitations. Service temporarily overloaded. File system is busy. Can't launch file. You do not have enough storage for this file. There are too many files. Please buy more storage. Files on different volumes. Too many open files. Too many files open. Maximum open file count reached. Purchase a larger storage plan. The system cannot move the file to a different disk drive. File table overflow, cannot delete an open file, can't exchange the file with itself. File ID already exists. Duplicate file name happens when file already exists. Conflict. Expected a folder, got a file. Malformed macho file. Inappropriate file type or format, file descriptor in bad state. This file can be previewed. This file is too big. This file is too big to preview. You can try again or check out our help center. Host unavailable. Additional participants couldn't be added to the share. Can't share with user. Sharing was unsuccessful. A failure to connect to the servers. Sharing failed due to a network failure. Restart backup and sync. Syncing is stuck. Manually sync files. Can't sync data across devices. Unable to complete sync. Invalid file type. The file contains one or more syntax errors. The file is not a dictionary. The file is not a part of the assembly. Read-only file. Nothing to read. Read beyond logical end of file. Operation not supported. Can't launch file. Specified destination does not exist. A file could not be mapped. Result too large to be mapped. Illegal seek. Operation now in progress. The enabler was asked to create a duplicate card entry. Foreign file system does not exist. Access denied. Power to the card has been turned on. The context ID was not valid. Identifier removed. Unauthorized. Address is not in file view. No file thread exists. No such record. Not supported. Deprecated. Bad file request. Operation not permitted. Argument list too long. Missing. File is corrupt. The system cannot open the file. Bad data in file. Need authenticator. Port was closed. Forbidden. Bus error. Broken pipe. Improper driver dispatch table. Illegal sequence. Too many clients. Terminal driver still needed by someone else. No space left on device. No route to host. Can't find the specified environment. Host unavailable. Bad address. Tracing error. Location name malformed. Track number wrong on address mark. Sector number never found on a track. Bad address mark bit slip nibbles. Moving to offspring error. No child processes. Not enough room. Buffer too small. Network is unreachable. Try to get to a non-existent property. Package 0 not present. Package 1 not present. Package 2 not present. Package 3 not present. Package 4 not present. Package 5 not present. Package 6 not present. Package 7 not present. Returned by driver. Step handshake failed. Reserved. Rejected. Transfer request was rejected. Privilege violation error. No locks available. Protocol error. Operation cancelled. No message of desired type. Too many processors. Too many users. Too many transactions. A coordinate overflow. General system error. Acceptable. Deflectable. Rejectable. Incorrect types. Invalid permissions. Reached end of file. End of file. Writing past end of file. Memory full. Cannot allocate memory. File won't fit. There are no more files. Out of memory. So.
Okay, Lieven, many thanks for this, I would call it a poem. I mean, many thanks for the poem, which is at the same time a really strong statement about, let's say, this illusion of total availability and the immateriality of digital archive. Mm-hmm. I think if people don't have a clue what just happened in the last 5 minutes, they can put questions and remarks on our Facebook event page, and then we will take all questions after the 3 presentations. Our second speaker of this panel is Choua Matthys, who's representing Agency here, which is a collective founded in 1992, based in Brussels, an international collective, an initiative focusing on so-called boundary things. Agency is composing a massive list of so-called boundary things that resist the division, the radical split between nature and culture, and boundary things also that question, let's say, the concept of ownership. So if I understood it correctly, the list, Choua's list, or the agency's list, is derived from controversies and juridical cases involving intellectual property. So Agency presents its lists in different formats, including exhibitions, performances, publications, and I guess today in the format of a lecture.
Okay, thank you. Can we have the screen also? Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? Hello, everyone. I'm going to give a very brief, more like a kind of situation of Agency. This is a presentation that usually takes a long time, but I'm going to go very quickly through it. But maybe before starting, I think one of the important references kind of that predates the beginning of agency is there was a lot back in the 60s, especially with the fluxus. There was a lot of like arts that was based on the basis of instructions or protocols. And what you see here is actually one by Yoko Ono called Painting to Exist Only When It's Copied or Photographed. And it's one of her instruction paintings. And it's a very kind of iconic type of work that today hangs in the collection of MoMA. And although it had like a kind of incentive to be an experimental work, it kind of never went beyond, let's say, the authorship role, or it questioned the authorship role of this artist. So the kind of the relationship between the licenses and the way, I mean, you can call it, I mean, it matters with which practices we make practices with, you could say. In this case, although the attempt of the fluxus was to kind of question the authority of the artist, somehow if you looked on a legal level, it never really created much change. There was a kind of phantom in a way that the law of authorship somehow holds still this kind of practices. And this is the GPL license, which is from the Free Software Foundation back in 1989. And here you see that license being reproduced in actually manuals of existing products. This is a series of 125 Dutch proverbs painted by Pieter Bruegel back in 1559. And this is a kort à proverbe from Congo. You know, I'm not going to go into detail, but a brief introduction. So agency was founded back in 1992. And the current working members are Kobe Matthys, Laurent Mignon, Catherine Rijst. And the other members are Gunther Boutsen, Jean-Pierre Ocaiti, Peggy Pierrot, Raphaël Pirenne, Laurence Rassel, Els Silverans, Christine van den Brande, Barbara van Dijk, and Ingrid Franken. So it's an officially registered NGO, non-profit association. This is the address. It's registered in Brussels, so maybe important to situate. Brussels used to be a swamp, very much because several rivers coming back together there. But as you can see on the photo also, it became a very kind of bureaucratic town. Here you see how the city turned its back to the river, which is underflowing the city. It's a bureaucratic town with many politics and bureaucracy, but that also attracts a lot of protests. So these are some images also of the Brussels Moor and its contestations and demonstrations and the protests, I think, which are all part of kind of situating agency. So agency actually is located in this building. It's near to the South Station, in an area or a commune called Saint-Gilles, and it's above the post office of Saint-Gilles, which was a building that was abandoned by the post because they only still have their post offices downstairs, and then it was renovated. So this is, for those who thought agency is only an address card, this is the actual building. What else can I say? So the term agency comes really from the notion of what you could say an assemblage, and an assemblage in the sense of like the character K of Kafka, like that beings are also constituted by the kind of bureaucratic environments that they are part of. And so bringing maybe the notion of the ecology of practices, which is a notion that comes from the book The Three Ecologies of Félix Guattari, where he not only talks in terms of ecology as environment, but also as social relations, but also mental health. So like how to enlarge this notion of ecology, especially if we're talking in relationship to practices, also art practices. And of course, any practice has attachments, and these attachments create a habitat, create constraints. There is no problem with attachments as such, but only when these attachments cannot be negotiated in a relational sense. And today one could question the whole property rights regime and how its impact it has on art practices. Just to kind of briefly note the doctrine of creatio ex nihilo, which means in Latin to kind of create out of the nothingness, which is really a very colonial concept. It's very similar to the terra nullius concept in terms of property. It's the idea that you have to create from the nothingness. So I'm not going to go very much deep in the whole history of the enclosures of the commons, but of course the whole 17th century modernist property rights regime caused a whole lot of closures, not only in the physical sense of the lands, but also in terms of the intangible knowledge and the whole knowledge economy. So, I mean, the least one can say is that there is some form of interference between the ecology of practices and this property regime. So agency started to develop a list of boundary things, and the list of boundary things, because the divides, the 17th century divides of property is also the divide between nature and culture. And how can you relate, how can you actually divide nature and culture? Something you declare nature, it becomes available for extraction, and the subject who owns it is the human. So the nature-culture divide is kind of inherent to this property right regime. And we were looking with agency in all kind of boundary cases, so where there's hesitation in between this classification. And most of the things on the list, they are actually based on controversies. So the list is at agency. Here you can see it's a series of many shelves based on tracks, and every shelf has about a number of boxes that are stored there, and every box has one of these boundary things inside of them. So you can see it here. So as I was mentioning, the boundary things are where there is a hesitation between nature and culture, and this is often talked or discussed in general terms. But if you relate it, for example, to the whole authorship questions, it's often discussed, this is something a fact, because that belongs to nature, or is it a creation? Or is something, I mean, even in terms of the creation, if the creation comes from the body, it's considered nature, but it has to come from the mind. So the body-mind divide is another parameter. And there's many of this kind of divides which are generally not discussed at large as nature and culture, but in these more subtle differences. Is something original, or is it banal? Is something functional, or is it a creation? I mean, these are all kind of parameters that are used in order to kind of create that divide on a daily level. And so around these boundary things, agency is organizing assemblies. And with assemblies, we mean like it's an invocation. So these things are forms of fabulations. And these fabulations are kind of ongoing. And if we invoke one of these boundary things during an assembly, the fabulation kind of continues to go on. So here are some images from assemblies or invocations, where the idea is always to talk in the presence of the thing itself, so the boundary thing itself, and also in resonance with people that do care or that are concerned, let's say it like this, and that also kind of address the notions of the ecologies of these practices. So, and it's very hard to kind of make an ecology aware, I mean, because it's always a form of relationality, let's say it like this. But by invoking the case in these assemblies, during the resonance, there's some kind of a mesopolitics that appears. So not the micropolitics of the event, nor the macropolitics of the law, but something about what is the mode of existence of a practice and how does it get affected by these micro and macro politics. So here are some more images of assemblies. So like the notion of property is only became through in the modernist times in terms of law to something understood as ownership, where it becomes an ownership, of course, of a human. But the properties itself, one could see it in a very different way. And the properties in the longer history means also something as the characteristics. So like you could say, for example, the properties of a plant or the properties of a stone. And so it's more a kind of animistic point of view, like how every being has properties. And how to reconnect to these more ancient notions of properties. And it's a very relational thing. It's, of course, also something that is very much, reciprocal, and that could be more associated to notions like, for example, sympoiesis or things like this. So a lot of these speculations during these assemblies is about how to include again some of these properties that's been kind of ignored. And so always like bringing back what actually has been excluded from this property rights regime. So here, for example, this is a series of boundary things that deal with how to include again the body, and it's mostly like practices in relation to choreography. Or I'm going to go very quickly now through it because we don't have much time. Or this is a series that relates about the collectivity, because often also, of course, practice is always collectively embedded, but the authorship system kind of pushes towards identifiable individuals. And so this, where does collective stop or not, and how to relate to that. So these are a lot of cases that relate to stories of collectivity in the sense of collaboration, or the relationship between makers and consumers. There's a series in relation to the what is original and what is common. So what's common kind of cannot be protected. But there are many practices that actually are important in terms of reproduction, but somehow have also a kind of originality in the repetitiveness. So it's more here about the questions of repetitiveness. Or some things get excluded from the commons because they belong to folklore and they kind of get classified as tradition and lack originality.
Could I ask you something, Choua?
Sure.
Just a question. Sorry for interrupting you. Could you specify some of these artifacts or objects that you assemble about or that you gather in these boxes? Could you show us some examples?
Well, I'm showing them now.
I know, but could you, let's say, concentrate on them
sure,
a bit
yeah.
and tell something about them?
Sure.
And why they blur the boundaries between nature and culture?
Yeah. So maybe I go choose one. Like this. This is a case, for example, that relates to the forms of taxidermists. So the taxidermists are practitioners that set up animals based on the skins, and they create fillings for the skins. But for example, here there are companies that the taxidermist, he casts on the dead animal, so it's a reproduction, let's say direct reproduction of the dead animal. But then you have companies that want to save time for certain taxidermists, and they reproduce based on these existing shapes, on these existing fillings. So in a way, there are casts of a dead body. And there was a whole discussion whether taxidermists also have sculptural qualities, because when they set up these animals, of course, they are not in the positions, because when you have a dead animal, it's not in this particular kind of poses. So a judge had to go over more than 400 forms to decide at what point actually a cast on the body of a dead animal becomes something original. And of course, it deals with their poses. But of course, taxidermists, they would say that the poses are chosen because often they know the animal. And it's not only about terms of kind of a spectacularity or something like this, but it's also about how they know the single different animals in question. So here, this is one example to go more into detail. And there, the divide is different in the sense of there's a shape that comes from a dead animal because it comes from an animal. Has it already sculptural qualities, or at what point do the sculptural qualities come in? But there's a whole set of, series. I'm just going through them very quickly, and they concern from gardens to dances to makeup or improvisational practices, sports. This is about orality, because it's a biography of Hemingway, and it's the question whether when he just talks, if it's already also literature coming out of his mouth, because he had a very verbatim way of writing. It's about the garden. This is about acting, because the writers are very much, authorship developed around writing, so the practice of defending creations is very much kind of developed around writing, but around actors, for example, were for a very long time not taken into consideration as being authors in a certain way, because they just interpret text. But these are things that all are a lot under discussion also today. This is on the difference between facts and fiction. or about the notion of the difference between IDs and expressions here in relation to characters.
And how many specimens does your archive encompass? Or?
There's the list of things contains about 2,410 of these boundary things, which we invoke like I said, in different series. But I think I can leave it to here, maybe.
So in every, let's say, every boundary thing, every specimen corresponds with a box, which must be, must result in a huge or massive archive.
Which I showed at the beginning in the photo, yeah.
Yeah.
Indeed. It's 100 square meters of storage right now.
Okay, Kobe, many, many thanks. I think you should give us a guided tour in the agency for sure. Okay, then we're going to switch to our last speaker of this panel, Saddie Choua. Saddie Choua is a visual artist, writer, documentary maker, and a doctoral researcher at VUB Rits School of Arts. Her conceptual work is a critique of the exotic and stereotypical narratives about migration and the other that are common in contemporary media and discourses. Her documentaries, video installations, mixed media collages, and short stories ask us to think about how we consume images and discourses and how these images and discourses impact our self-image and our historical consciousness. Central to her practice and her research is the question how art can work in a politically emancipatory way within our current patriarchal, racist, and capitalist society. And this last phrasing was a quote by Saddie, I guess. Saddie, the floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, Arne. I will start with a short introduction to my research. And so I will read this from my paper. As you said, from my own practice as a visual artist, video artist, documentary maker, I wonder how art can work politically within our current patriarchal, racist, and capitalist society. And I want to confront the maker, viewer, participant with the underlying power mechanisms that determine our media culture. The research that I do is to find audiovisual, textual, conceptual translation to collect images, unlock them, and show where the viewer goes through an awareness process. The interaction between theme, philosophy, concept, and film installation space will reinforce both poles. So the medium not only becomes part of the message, but the medium is the message. I ask myself how you make a film that is not only a transfer of information, but that is also transformative. A film that not only gives knowledge about the world, but also about yourself. A film that reveals your own position within power structures. A film that arms you, that makes that you meet, discover, find and recognize yourself as a transformed political subject, a new subject, a different subject. And as you can see there, the title of my PhD is The Personal is or is Not Political. And I like to quote here Professor Petra van Brabant, who recently wrote about my work. Through a combination of found footage, personal archives and objects, filming and relational events, the artist expresses her personal truth regarding her being the object of racial, gender and class oppression and the subject of feminist resistance. Through autobiographical signs and clues, Saddie is present in her work. She can't afford to be otherwise. Oppression, which consists of symbolic and factual erasure, forces her to occupy an insisting and abrasive presence. This presence isn't joyful, willful, or rewarding. It's being present where you wish to disappear." End quote. So here you can see a picture, and in 2010 grew the idea to develop a story based on this picture. 5 men pushed in the corner of a room, a picture found in a newspaper or in a family album lost in the attic, a picture that produces questions. Where has it been made? What is the relation between these men? Who took the picture? And being the daughter of the man in the middle, I know these are 5 brothers. These are the Chouas. And this picture is made in Morocco. And actually it all started here in the Kite where I was invited in November 2010, and I introduced this film. I mean, I wanted to make a film. And the starting point was 5 brothers. The family does not count sisters. 3 migrated to Belgium. 1 brother went back to Morocco, and the 2 youngest brothers stayed in Morocco and did not migrate. My question, a question the picture does not answer: what was the best choice? So I wanted to know what migration does or does not to a person. So that summer, I went to Morocco with my camera. I tried to meet with my uncles and film their lives. Who made the best choice? That question was quite a challenge. But the real difficulty was on the artistic level, on the level of images. So I realized that I did not succeed in capturing the right images. My camera filmed the same exotic images I hated so much. I therefore chose not to make a single-screen document. In this process, I was haunted by the fact that immigrants have no control over their own images. The images we see are not our images. And how we consume exotism is how we consume images, is how we consume minorities. So I decided to deduplicate the film and project it on 2 screens, so that the story provided both images and content for speech and contradiction. And then further scenographic possibilities were developed to visualize the stories of the Chouas in a spatial setting, to open up the monolinear story and image in a complex of parallel images and stories. And yes, I realized that my film that I wanted to show at Kite which was also showed actually, but in another form, that this film could not be made any further. And I decided to make this impasse a bit bigger, an artistic research in the form of a soap opera, a meta-soap, a philosophical soap, an anti-soap, in which I present the Chouas as characters, and every new episode gives more insight. Later it became part of my doctoral research. The challenge is to create situations that reveal the power structures that create the images we internalize and therefore reproduce. It's not the literal past that rules us, it's the images of the past. So how can we intervene in the image that create our history and therefore our present and future? Do we have to challenge memory and history by creating another story, another perspective, or can we play with connections and associations to rewrite history? So if memory consists of dominant images, how can this stream of images be deconstructed in order to reframe and recreate memory? And then the most difficult, belonging to the other, am I able to do it differently? To make other images about minorities, or does the format itself lock me up? So in episode 3, the Chouas, I swear by God Almighty, I say the truth and nothing but the truth. I ask myself, what is truth? Not the truth as it is proclaimed, but the truth as we accept it, embody it, and reproduce it every day. Which stories, which images, which dominant codes are socializing us every day? Do we reproduce every day as if it's normal without questioning it? It are precisely those dominant codes that maintain racism, sexism, classism, and the colonial present. How do we adjust our view? What is an objective view? What has the most weight in that gaze? The gaze that is rooted from awareness and insight in injustice should weigh in our objectivity. I will show some pictures. So here the picture of the Chouas is in front, when you have the image of it, the picture of the Chouas is in front of course it's a still for my film, so it's only one still. The picture of the Chouas is in front of one of the sisters of Sister Sledge, that's what I know. So here you see the struggle of women who have to deal with the oppression of the male image. Later this image returns. When I am on the market, here I am on the market, a market with only men. So I use my own body, performative body, that operates within the public and private space as a body that embodies that colonial history, but also fight against it. The body that fights a feminist and economic struggle. The body that is there to make other images. The body that you have to break free from existing dominant images. When you are structured in a dominant culture, that struggle is difficult because you have also interiorized those dominant images of yourself. On the other picture, which is also a still of episode 3, I use a connection to nature. Plants, or shall I say the absence of plants. I use them as an archive. They have an incredible memory. So in episode 3, I talk about the war against the Amazigh people, where my family belongs to, in the north of Morocco in the 1920s, and the German chemical weapons used against them by the Spanish colonizer with their leader, Franco. This was after World War I, where Europe said never to use chemical weapons again. But where do you find this in our archives? I will show some of pictures of my work. As you can see, they are mostly installations. And this work is actually episode 5 from the Chouas. Episode 5, Am I the Only One Who Is Like Me? And this one was made for an exhibition at Kiosk Gallery in Ghent, with the amazing title, Show Me Your Archive and I Will Tell You Who Is in Power. And the exhibition wanted to extend its scope beyond Western white feminism and trace a transnational and intersectional perspective. I started from my personal archive, from when I was a child, my books, stuff from school, records, dolls, and so on. And I realized I grew up with a lot of racist figures and racist events. So I made a work with objects, boxes, films, I think 6 films, with mostly found footage and found footage that I found on YouTube, but also home video, text of Toni Morrison's book, The Bluest Eye, also personal racist messages I received, and so on. So I will go through this work. As you can see, I try also to make my work in a way that you can go there and you can go into the installation and search things you want to know, make connections yourself, and use it actually as an archive that you can explore. Here, maybe this is, again, still from episode 3. Maybe it's a little bit confusing, but this is a little bit my work also. So here, in that work, I play also with high and low culture, and I use reference at the same level. So both are formative, shape us in different ways. And for example, with those images, with the tree, and the beach, I use a text of Chekhov. That seems strange, seems unusual, because it is used in a Moroccan-Belgian film, but actually it is correct. Chekhov is correct because it tells an economic story and is internationalized. References of economic exploitation are in Russia, but also in Morocco and certainly here. So I want to show how the history of racism is exploitation politics. The Chouas are not about identity politics, but about exploitation, an economic system of exploitation. And that is, of course, reflected in images. Minorities are presented as not normal or inferior, which make it easier to exploit them. Here I bring Chekhov together with the language and script of my father. So as I told already, they are Amazigh people, indigenous people of Morocco, with their own language and script, Tamazight and Tifina. And this was forbidden for a long time and was kind of disappearing. So in this way, I do not only by subtitling it, a part of this film, I'm not only making it visible, but I'm also connecting it to Chekhov. So it is seen as a language, and a written language and an active language. I also would love to show a fragment. And the fragment is part of, or maybe I just wanted to show, if we still have time, some more pictures quickly about my work and the installations and the connections that I make. The fragment that I will show from episode 5, the episode with the boxes, and the 6th film is important for me in different ways. As a child, I always hated myself because I was not white enough. And actually, this was very painful, of course. And actually, by making this work also, I knew this, of course, before, but then I got new elements myself by making this work. I discovered that I was right. And by focusing on feminism, which was also the focus of the exhibition, my attention was focused on the pill, seen as a feminist issue that made the female body free. But it was actually first of all, a racist issue. The invention of the pill, not only with the goal to limit the black population already in the belly of the mother, but also women of color were used as guinea pigs to do tests. So feeling of less value as a child was not that strange. And so the fragment that I will show now, it's the first minutes of one of those films. And it's, for me, also a little bit difficult to show it here because it's also hard, and it's connected with objects and other films in the installation. This is actually how we have to see it, but I will show it anyway.
Hey guys! This video is all about earning and keeping your guinea pig's trust. It takes a bit of effort to earn their trust, but it's absolutely worth it. The first step is to give your guinea pigs time. They all have different personalities and some are more trusting than others. Sometimes it might feel like you're not making any progress, but hang in there because sooner or later your piggy will accept you as the food person. Some guinea pigs trust their owners after a few weeks, while it might take years for other piggies. Don't worry if you've had your guinea pigs for a few weeks already and they still hide when you enter the room. They're all different and a few months really is not that long to care for a guinea pig. It's uncomfortable for guinea pigs to be taken out of their cage, as it's weird for them to not have all 4 feet on the ground. So make sure to just sit next to their cage and talk to them, fill up their hay, but don't take them out of the cage every time you go to them. You want them to recognize you as the veggie person and not as someone who always takes them out of the cage. While this scared piggy is probably not going to enjoy being put on a scale, you still minimize the stress and it will learn that it doesn't have to be afraid of health checks. If you want to pet your guinea pigs, only do it if your piggies allow you to pet them. Make your piggies come to you and not the other way around. If they come to the cage opening, you can carefully try to pet their nose. If your piggy runs away, try again later. If your guinea pigs are already at a point where they're pretty much tame, you can also reward behavior that you want to encourage. For example, if they're running around you during floor time and they start sniffing your foot or your jeans, you can give them a small piece of veggie. If you do this often enough, your piggies will learn that you're a really cool giant veggie feeder and that it's fun to be around you. At the same time, they can also just go and ignore you when they find something else that's really cool, such as a new hiding spot. Once they explored the new hiding spot, they might come back to you if you haven't moved to get to know you better. If your guinea pig displays behavior you don't want to encourage, ignore the behavior. Don't punish it. Reward the positive and ignore the negative. Your guinea pigs might not know how to behave around a human. It's as much of a learning process for them as it is for you. If your guinea pig doesn't move at all and is frozen, it's really scared. Go away from the cage and let it relax before you try interacting with it again. I hope you enjoyed this video and see you guys next time. Bye!
Here is the house, it's green and white. It has a red door, it is very pretty. Here is the family. Father, Dick and Jane live in the green and white house. They are very happy. See Jane, she has a red dress. She wants to play. Who will play with Jane? See the cat, it goes meow, meow, come and play. Come and play with Jane, the kitten will not play. See Mother, Mother's very nice. Mother, will you play with Jane? Mother laughs. Laugh, Mother, laugh. See Father, he is big and strong. Father, will you play with Jane? Father is smiling, smile, Father, smile. See the dog, bow, wow, goes the dog. Do you want to play? Do you want to play with Jane? See the dog run, run, dog, run. Look, look, here comes a friend. The friend will play with Jane. They will play a good game. Play, Jane, play.
No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first we have to bring them to heel.
Willen jullie in deze stad en in Nederland meer of minder Marokkanen?
But first we have to bring them to heal. 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 Bring them to heal.
Dan gaan we dat regelen.
Okay, Saddie, many thanks for your great presentation and this shocking, compilation. In your case, it's very explicit, but I think it's interesting to discuss it with Lieven and Choua as well. In how far do you consider, let's say, the archive as an intrinsically political, ideological system that is based on omitting, neglecting, erasing, and forgetting, not only on keeping things, but also on deleting things? Especially you both, you build up archives, and how far can you build an archive considering that fact? That it's always a kind of selection, and it's always entails forgetting, erasing, I don't know. Yeah, cool.
Okay, well, we call it the lists because the archive kind of has more the idea also to kind of really collect things and to be, complete in some form or another. While a list is just, it's like, it's a list of things. You just list it and the list changes all the time. So, yeah, and I think the list of things is also about how, because usually archives also bring about systems of classification. And the list of things that we're kind of focusing on is on the difficulty of actually how to classify them. And the fact that at some point they had a difficulty to be classified allows actually to pay attention to them, or the controversy, makes that they end up on the list, so to say. Yeah. But it's not trying to be complete. Also, it's very hard to not make the culture nature divide. If you already talk about subjects and objects, you're already talking in terms of this divide. So, yeah, we call them things in order, like, okay, if you take a step back before you start to classify them, to name them, and it's more of an animistic approach, and that's why I was referring to the properties in its ancient sense, not in the sense of like the way how it became to understood of as ownership, but it's really about the singularity of every being, and also and how the coexistence of these beings also are something else. In the sense of like a symbiopoiesis, because it's a kind of constructing together also all the time, and it's a very complex. In terms of an ecosystem, it's a very complex issue. It's not something that you can easily kind of, define. It's, because the interconnectivity is a complex thing.
Yeah. Okay. Lieven, in your case, although it seemed like a kind of playful poem, it's all about, let's say, erasure and forgetting.
Yeah, I think when you bring up the concept of an archive, most people think of harvesting and collecting. But I think one of the most crucial tasks when building an archive is actually deleting, trashing, omitting what is not suited or whatever. And that's where the whole politics come in of what do you allow to be in this containment or this container within the boundaries of an archive, and what doesn't make the cut. And I think it used to be we used to have very clear, even physical standards for that. Like you had a basement and where an archive had to fit, and then at some point this basement becomes too small. You either say, well, we enlarge it, or we get rid of stuff. And in the 20th century, it was this evolution of a lot more information, a lot more bureaucratic systems that were being developed, and there was this urge and this need to discard actual materials. And back then, I think our archivalists were really struck by this thing of, well, now we have to, like, the role of us as an archivist is more about actually pushing stuff out and taking stuff in. And I think in that sense, and you mentioned it also, boundary things, like it's the whole concept of boundary in an archive is I think is crucial to what you're trying to do. And when we're evolving towards this idea of what I was getting at, this digital way of archiving and containment, this idea of limits or container, it kind of evaporates a bit, because there's this idea of unlimited storage, unlimited. You can put stuff in the cloud, which is the concept of a cloud. When I think of it, is completely the opposite of what we think of as an archive that is in a concrete basement and that is fixed into place, where a cloud is ephemeral thing that moves, that travels, that changes. And I think in that sense, it's of course the physical infrastructure is still in some air-conditioned industrial space or on the bottom of the ocean. But I think it's crucial for the way people
burned down, by the way, in Strasbourg, and had a huge consequences.
Well, there you go. It's not forever.
What is burned down? I didn't understand.
There was one clouds, so supposedly clouds. I mean, a building in Strasbourg that that burned down, and it had a huge impact on all the data that was no longer available all of a sudden. Yeah.
I think that's more or less what I'm maybe getting at with this, either playful, but also this idea that these things are not visible anymore. I mean, if you go to an archive, a paper archive, like this thing is there, and you have to go through the pages, and you have to go. Right now, like the idea of having something out there that is at your disposal, but is not really visible the way it is at your disposal, is crucial in the way we think about harvesting and collecting stuff. And I think the need for, and that's my personal opinion, I think the need for discarding and trashing and forgetting is got even higher with this idea if we can harvest everything. But in the end, it's not really, I think discardance in that sense can be a very nurturing thing for an archive. Instead of, most people say, like, as an archivist, you want to keep as much as possible, you want to gather as much as possible, you want to preserve as much as possible. But I think in many cases, the discardance actions, or the stuff you let go and the stuff you delete, I think is maybe even more important in terms of what an archive can be and how to nurture an archive, in a sense.
Although, of course, it is inevitably a kind of act of violence, you could say.
Yeah, it is.
Discarding historical material. But another thing that I think unites your three projects and approaches is this idea of Saddie, who said, I want to put my viewer or my visitor into action. And I think when visiting my exhibitions. And I would love to hear how does that take specific form? How do you put people to action to work with an archive, instead of considering an archive as kind of static and stable repository? So what are the tactics you operate with?
Mm-hmm. What I often use, it can be objects, but also images, is something that seems familiar. So, because this is what attracts people, then they go there because they know it already. But of course, I don't want them to know what they already know or what is already archived. But then they are a little bit surprised, and there is kind of there is a rupture that happens. For example, in the editing, then I put something there what seems completely different and has nothing to do with it. And that makes them, I think, understand that there is something at stake. And for me, it is important also that this is very, because what I want to achieve is quite difficult. It's quite, it's like on a kind of a meta level. And so I call them kind of very simple things to help people to jump to another level. So most of what I use mostly is popular culture to do this. And this can be also music videos or books, things that we do know. And I think it's very important that they are normative, but also very simple, so that it's already a work that is done just by this popular culture that you don't need to put effort to. So I think this is something that really helps me to. And then, of course, because you don't expect, you think like, oh, I know this and I like this song, and you go to listen to it. And then there is something different that then seems that this song is a racist song, for example, and you've never listened to that song before, like as if it's a racist song. But then once you hear the song and it turns out to be a racist song, then I think you also can question yourself, because then you said like, how come that I never noticed before? And so I like people to think about that. And so this is one of the methods that I use.
Yeah. Another method could be, let's say, this kind of confrontational intermingling between historical facts and personal narratives. And that creates some kind of short circuits, I guess, with visitors. Seeing abstract historical information, seeing them combined with very personal and intimate family narratives.
Yeah, so this is also what I'm doing, but I have to say that this is also very difficult, because as I use my personal history, this is also, I have to say, it's especially also in Belgium that I noticed this, is that once you do personal stuff, then as a migrant, or having a migrant background, because actually I did not migrate, of course, but I still am seen as someone with another background, but then you are immediately doing identity politics. So I'm very much framed by this. And this is sometimes more difficult, because then people don't make the step to another level, because they still stay in this personal history. And I don't know, it's so difficult actually to, that's why I also wanted to show this fragment actually, because there was one picture of myself, and I of course, I'm not a black person, but I make a connection to, in our country, it's often Moroccan people, like, you know, with the same background as me, who are, for example, killed by police. So I wanted also to make this personal connection. And it's very difficult that people ask me like, oh, so you're making again, that's also the word that they use, you're making again a film about your roots or about your father, and they don't see what I'm actually talking about power relationships, and that I want to show who is in power and who is not in power. So actually this is very difficult, and I'm still looking for a method to deal with this. Is this mine?
I don't know. I guess it's mine. No? Yeah. Choua, I mean, you were talking about these assemblies, these gatherings. I'm very curious to hear, I mean, what takes place exactly, I mean, during those assemblies? What's the exchanges that take place?
Yeah. So every boundary thing is based on a controversy, on a discussion, let's say it like this. And when you invoke that discussion, it creates new discussions. It's a fabulation, to fabulate, like, and the fabulation always goes on, depending on where you invoke it and how people will kind of reconsider the story. But it's mostly the idea is to invoke it in the presence of that thing, you know, so to be really beside of it. But also how that case, because often if a judge in the precedence decides the case in a certain way, it has huge political consequences also. So also how does it resonate, the decision, and how to revisit that moment maybe of doubt that happened actually before the decision was taking part, and how to slow it down, and also how to think on how it affects the ecology of a practice. So yeah, it's to see how it resonates more and to continue the fabulation around it, not to kind of have it stabilized in some form. I mean, the judgment, of course, if it's considered a legal judgment, there's a decision. I mean, that's what the judge has to do. But from there on, often it moves on. I mean, there's new precedents, new stories coming on. So it's also a kind of ongoing fabulation, and it's a way of like to activate the case more from a point of view of a palabre or a discussion rather than to kind of reaffirm a judgment. It's actually to kind of, speculate, to break it back open again and see what other outcomes could be or yeah.
Extremely interesting. And how do you prevent this stabilization, Lieven, as Choua called it, this stabilization of archives, and how do you put people into action to actively deal with these repositories?
Yeah, that's a key thing I've been working lately with, and always done this with either existing archive or making your own archives. But I think there's this process of digitization, for instance, was for a lot of existing archives this holy grail of, now we can digitize it and we can open it up and we can have it forever. But then it becomes like available. And you can often see that this strategy ends up taking an archive from some kind of locked-in space and putting it in a digital container that is equally locked, and I would say even more locked, because there's issues, like you say, there's technical issues that make it far easier to become deprecate and to become like unaccessible in a later term. And in that sense, there's this contradictory process there. So what I think, and when I handle materials of an existing archive is I try to come up with ways to somehow not just take the material and present it at once in an exhibition, or for instance, and then have it be put back in the archive again, where either digital or physical, and have it locked away again. But to think of strategies how you can actually use this archive material, make it contemporary, put it to use in a contemporary way, and somehow already think of how is this presentation going to last over time, and how can I come up with new ways to actually disclose this material in a meaningful way, so that it becomes truly accessible in a way, and not accessible just as something that you just put there, but in a way somehow come up with ways to rethink what this material could mean today. And so I think in that sense, I think the design of interfaces, design of spaces, even infrastructures is super important in that sense, and that you really try to think of a combination where this digital and physical space kind of connect, and that you make use of these tools. So yeah, I think in that sense, I think that would be a way to think outside of this fixed container boundary, fixed boundary thing, to somehow explore the options of how you can put an archive to use, and how you can make it available in a meaningful way.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question. I think Pascal Gielen will forgive us of being 5 minutes late. We started 5 minutes late after all. So, but maybe I would like to confront you to close off the discussion with I would like to pay tribute to a great Belgian sociologist, Rudy Laermans, who actually, in a famous article in the Witte Raaf, coined this term of the anarchive, or it was actually borrowed from Derrida, I guess, but then again, he gave it an interesting definition in a contemporary context. And as you all work with, Saddie works with popular culture, with let's say fragments from popular culture, you of course are dealing with authorship, the question of authorship, ownership, and Lieven of course in his poem ripped, ripped material, not of his own, between brackets.
A single word myself.
Precisely. So I'd love to confront you with an interesting quote by Laermans. I'm afraid in Dutch, but I'll guess the audience will forgive me. He's talking about nomadism as a kind of bestaansconditie of the contemporary artist. He says, maybe contemporary artists are opportunistic. And I quote him. Doorslaggevend is dat voor veel hedendaagse kunstenaars het maken van kunst thans neerkomt op het manipuleren van informatie. De kunstenaar wordt een informatieverwerker wiens handelingen tot op grote hoogte gelijken op die van iedere andere digitale surfer. Voorbij het directe opereren met pixels of bits en bytes door fotografen of videokunstenaars deed de digitale informatiemaatschappij een nieuw soort van informatiekunst ontstaan waarbinnen het verleden en het heden imploderen in een constant hernieuw artistiek anarchief dat naar believen kan worden geplunderd of geciteerd. De hedendaagse kunst is behalve generieke conceptkunst vaak ook informatiekunst, waarbinnen het onderscheid tussen actieve appropriatie, I'm gonna use this, en passieve consumptie, this is mine, is uitgewist of minstens onduidelijk wordt. It's a quite heavy quote, but I don't know, I mean, what do you think about this statement and his vision on how does a contemporary artist actually differ in his or her approach from a regular surfer, plundering things, appropriating things and combining them? Arne, what do you think, Saddie?
Ja, zeg maar.
Or what is a kind of, I mean, yeah, how does an artistic approach differs from, let's say, a digital surfer? Just compiling things and...
No, I think since the 60s there's this whole idea of the death of the author and the disappearance of the author. And but if you look at it from a legal point of view, there's a huge expansion of the property rights system. I mean, in different ways, not only like the more and more growing intellectual property rights system, but also the World Trade Agreements that actually implemented on most of the nation states. So since the signage of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, the TRIPS, which is a trade-related intellectual property rights regime, is implemented in 147 countries, which is like almost every country, with an exception maybe of 5 or 6 countries. I mean, even China, Cuba, all these countries signed and engaged themselves to nationally implement that law system, which is an enormous expansion of the intellectual property rights system. So the idea of that there is the death of the author and the disappearance of the author, I think, is very much contradicted also about how things legally are organized today. Also, it's not a small detail, but since the WTO, the intellectual property rights system is the default. That means if you want another type of regime to count, you actively have to do something. And that's why the GPL license came about, for example, because in the beginning, when you wanted the author rights system and the intellectual property rights system to count, you had to manifest it. You had to put a C there, or you had to register it, you had to deposit it in an archive. There was an office in most countries where you deposited it, your creations. Today it's no longer necessary. Just a simple act of creation, by default you fall in the intellectual property rights system, which if you think in terms of a cadastre, it's a cadastre that ongoingly is like, manifesting itself even without any form of notion. So actually if you want to go against and not use these practices, you have to actively set up other license or getting involved in the legal matter. So I mean that's just maybe a small
small but fundamental, I mean, remark.
Remark, because I think this is very, very highly underestimated. Also, if you look in terms of the impact of intellectual property now on the patenting of living organisms through gene modification and so on. I mean, these are expansions that were unimaginable, like even, 50 years ago. So yeah, I think the notion of the archive, what does it mean there? Because it's really also relating to a cadastre that is almost kind of going automatically. I mean, patents you still have to register, trademarks too, but for on the copyright system, it's just a simple fact of a creation brings it under a protective regime of intellectual property.
Okay. Saddie, I mean...
Actually, for me, I work also with the cultural archive, and this is for me the archive that's in our head, and this is what we base our when we meet people, like we meet minorities, for example, we already have a certain image of them in our head, and this image, of course, is based on a certain archive, because the archive that I would maybe like to use or to serve a little bit, it's not there. For me, this cultural archive now makes me think, when I try to relate it to the quote, is that actually we know all this. I'm not going to explain it, but that sometimes we think about something, and then 1 hour later we see it on Facebook, for example. We all have this strange, we know that it's based on certain other things, but still I was thinking that maybe I should invent something that when for this cultural archive, how to relate to this cultural archive, that I was thinking about this kind of sexismothèque, for example, that when you want to ask an article on some women's issue, then you mostly got articles that are racist, for example. And so I was thinking, like, can we do something that when you surf, for example, that you get something that is not what you usually will find on Google, for example. So I'm trying also to think in a technical way how I can have this sexismothèque, for example, or and in that way, I think artists can still try, maybe also to continue on this level, and that it's not, of course, because I do understand really that it's a kind of surfing. But yeah, I don't know. This is what came into my mind now.
Okay, and Lieven, maybe to conclude, because
I think it taps a bit into what Choua and Saddie already said. I think the question of origin or originality, like that has come under, like it has shifted in a way, like how to be original, how to be creative in a way. I mean, you also mentioned it in your lecture there. This creation from nothingness. I think with all the materials we have now, I think more and more artistic practices can be or somehow work with this creation from vastness instead of nothingness. And I think there the key is in how you, or the artistic value in that sense, where you say, well, what's the difference between someone collecting stuff just surfing about and then someone really using it as an artistic practice, is I think in the way you reconfigure what you find and how you combine these things. So I think also you mentioned this originality in repetitiveness, for instance, in your lecture. I think all of those things that were somehow used to be completely disassociated with creative practice, in the sense that it was not original and it was not like it stemmed from the mind and from the hands of the artist. I think having all this footage and having all these materials makes it like the way you can reconfigure those materials is I think to me it has become a bit of an artistic practice in itself, that it's and somehow it's not only in the reconfiguration of this information, but also in how you try to connect it with critical thoughts and how you actually put it into practice and show it in a different way than just on a screen or so I think that to me the key is there in how you use this material and reconfigure it, and that in that sense can be original in a way.
Okay. Many thanks, Lieven. Many thanks, Choua. Many thanks, Saddie, for this great, fascinating talk and panel.